"Don't hurt her, sell her to me," said the farmer when he saw the stepmother beating her daughter, abandoned by her father and tormented by her stepmother. Azima's life was a silent hell, until the day her stepmother's cruelty erupted into a public beating in the middle of the village market. While everyone watched in silence, one man stepped in. Baraka, the reclusive farmer, made an unexpected offer. He bought Azima's freedom with nothing but his words. He took her to his farm, a place of silence and hard work. The village began to whisper, wondering about the true intentions of that mysterious man. Had he bought himself a wife, or just a servant? What no one realized was that Baraka saw in Azima a reflection of his own past, a life marked by abandonment, and that rescue wasn't an act of charity, but the beginning of an unlikely bond, where two wounded souls would find, in each other, a chance to start over. The path between the village of Kiwanya and Baraka's farm was a dirt road, lined with trees that knew well the silence of those who carry burdens too heavy to be told. Baraka was one of them, a man of few words, a direct gaze, and calloused hands. He bore the weight of a rootless life. Orphaned since childhood, he had learned to work before he learned to trust. The people respected him, but no one dared call him a friend. They said he lived alone by choice, but only he knew how. Much solitude had been imposed on him. That day, he hadn't gone to the market for supplies. It was fate that led him there. His horse slowed to a trot on instinct, and his eyes saw what no one dared step in to stop. A girl being beaten like an animal. In the middle of the street, dust mixing with swallowed sobs. It wasn't the beating that hurt the most. It was the absence of a single hand raised to defend her. And that's what Baraka saw. More than slaps. He saw abandonment, raw and exposed before a silent crowd. When Baraka stepped down from the horse, the sound of his boots on the dry ground cut through the air. The murmurs stopped, the merchants averted their eyes, and the children stopped running. Nafula's hand was still raised, but she didn't strike again. Baraka's gaze was too heavy to ignore. He stared at the woman for long seconds, then said, "Don't hurt her, sell her to me." Then, the sentence hit the silence like a stone. The words, though simple, carried something no one could name. It was more than an offer. It was a sentence, a judgment. Nafula scoffed, pulling at her skirt and giving a short laugh, as if not taking the man seriously. "Then take her. Let's see how long you last with this useless thing," she said, spitting out the last word, as if it were an animal. "You owe me nothing." "She's free." Free. Azima heard it, but didn't understand. Freedom had never been an option in her life. She stared at the ground, too afraid to lift her head. Scraped knees, a bruised face, and a soul curled in on itself. Baraka extended his hand, but she hesitated. For the first time, someone was offering her something, and she didn't know if she was allowed to accept it. Without a word, he simply walked ahead. Azima followed, not by choice, but because her tired feet knew there was nothing left behind. The villagers, who saw everything, said nothing. Some women crossed themselves, others shook their heads, but no one stepped in. No one offered shelter, no one protested, because in the village, other people's pain was seen as part of the landscape, and Azima had long since become forgotten scenery. On the way back, the silence was thick. Baraka didn't look back, and Azima didn't dare look sideways. He didn't tell her where to go or what to do. He simply mounted his horse and walked slowly. From time to time, he glanced sideways to see if she was still coming, and she was, with slow, wounded, but steady steps. Because, for the first time, there was someone ahead. Not pushing, not shouting, just walking. When they reached the wooden gate of the farm, Baraka unlocked it with an old key, the kind that groans with tired iron. The sound echoed like an announcement. A new story was beginning there, even if no one yet knew how. He pointed to the clay house with a simple porch. "You'll sleep there. There's a bed, water, and bread, if you want it." She didn't respond, didn't even thank him, just walked in. Baraka stayed outside for a while, looking up at the sky that threatened rain despite the high sun. It was as if nature itself was confused like he was. He had bought a girl's freedom with nothing but his voice, nothing more, and now he didn't know what to do with it. Inside the room, Azima gently shut the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, looked at her hands dirty with dust and dried blood. She touched the clean sheet with hesitation, as if afraid to stain something too beautiful for her. And that night, for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep without sobbing. She didn't dream, but she didn't cry either. And sometimes, That's more than enough to begin again. Asterisk. Baraka's farmland was generous, but demanding, just like life. Fertile soil, but it only yielded to the sweat of those who knew how to work it. When Azima arrived, there were no speeches, no warm welcomes. The wooden gate creaked shut behind her with a slow, almost solemn groan, as if saying, "Here, a new time begins." But neither she nor Baraka knew what to do with that time. The house was simple, but clean. The smell of toasted flour and firewood still burning in the stove gave off a strange sense of comfort. Azima, used to being treated with contempt, hesitated to fully step inside. She lingered in the doorway, her feet still outside, like someone unsure whether they're allowed to cross into a place they've never been invited. Baraka didn't insist. He simply pointed, without a word, to a side room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, a wooden bed covered with a faded blue sheet, a pitcher of fresh water, and a straw mat folded in the corner. Azima entered with short, dragging steps. She ran her fingers along the bed frame, scanning the room as if searching for traps. There were no shouts, no orders, just silence. In those first days, the silence between them was like a third inhabitant of the house. Azima would wake early, wash the porch, sweep the yard, collect firewood, and do what she had always done: work without asking, obey without knowing. Baraka, for his part, left for the fields before the sun was fully up, and only returned when the trees' shadows stretched long across the ground. They hardly looked at each other. She didn't speak, neither did he, but there were gestures. One late afternoon, Baraka left a fresh loaf of bread on the table. It was still warm. He didn't say it was for her, but he left the room, and minutes later, Azima picked up a piece with trembling hands. She ate slowly, like someone afraid it might be taken back. The next day, the bread was there again. One morning, while Baraka was feeding the goats, he saw Azima on her knees in the yard, scrubbing a pot until it shone. The sun hit her face, and she squinted, but didn't stop. That scene, so ordinary, stirred something in him, because she wasn't just cleaning a pot, she was reclaiming her dignity, one scrub at a time. That night, he placed an extra blanket in her room. The weather was cooling, and she had a light cough. She noticed, but said nothing. She simply pulled the blanket up to her chin and, for the second time, fell asleep without tears. Over time, Azima began to care for the house with more attention. The windows were always open, the clothes lined up neatly on the rope, and even wildflowers started to appear in clay pots on the porch. Small touches no one teaches, signs that a woman is turning a shelter into a home. Baraka noticed everything, but said nothing. He still left early, returned late, but now his gaze had softened. One day, arriving from the field, he saw the gate had been repaired. The wood had been sanded, tied with fresh sisal rope. Azima was turned away, tending to the garden. He stood there for a moment, just watching, then went inside without a word. Sometimes at dinner, the only sound was the spoon tapping against the plate. Other times, not even that. But on one of those silent nights, Azima murmured, "Thank you," for the room. So softly it almost got lost in the wind outside. But Baraka heard, and he didn't reply with words. He got up, took a new candle, and placed it by her bedside. A small gesture, but it said, "I heard you, I see you." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was a process, a bridge. Slowly, Azima stopped walking with hunched shoulders. She started to look ahead, even if she still didn't know where she was going. And Baraka, who had never known how to care for anyone, was starting to learn that to welcome someone isn't about pretty words or promises. It's about opening the door and not closing it once the other steps in. There, on that small farm lost between the brush and the whispers of the village, two souls were learning what it meant to begin again, even if they didn't yet know what to call it. Time in the village wasn't measured by clocks, but by glances, and it only took Azima lifting her head a little higher for the stares to begin. Curious, sharp, restless. The older women, seated on the wooden benches around the square, between one stitch and another, began weaving words with the same care they used to line up their threads, and once the words started flowing, the questions came laced with poison disguised as laughter. "Did you see he took the girl into his house?" asked the chattiest of them, Mama Jalia, a raspy-voiced woman who never let a single detail go unnoticed. "I saw, yes, right there in front of everyone. Like buying a chicken at the market," replied another, shaking her head. Word is, it wasn't out of pity. They say old Baraka got tired of being alone and bought himself a wife. Young, just the way men like them, added a third. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. The laughter was quiet, like distant thunder before the storm of malice. But no one dared say these things to his face. Baraka was respected, but feared. He was never one for easy smiles or small talk at the market. Always walked with a straw hat pulled low over his eyes, and when he spoke, every word seemed heavier than his own body. That's why the whispers stayed at the edges, in the corners of homes, on the seamstresses' benches, in the riverside chatter between loads of laundry. Azima, on her end, said nothing. But she felt it. She knew. She caught fragments, noticed the sideways glances and twisted smiles. Still, she kept washing, sweeping, harvesting. She didn't want to be seen, but she didn't want to disappear either. She existed in between, caught between a past that still hurt and a future that still frightened her. It was on one of those calm mornings that Baraka, upon finding the corral fence broken, asked the closest neighbor, Mz Kaloum, for help. As they repaired the wood, they overheard a woman in the distance, her tone dripping with sarcasm. They say he even serves the maid coffee now. Maid or wife? Hard to tell. Baraka looked up but said nothing. He simply hammered harder, as if the sound of the nail could drown out the insult. Hours later, when he got home, Azima was sweeping the porch. He approached slowly and said, without looking straight at her, "They're saying I bought a wife." Azima froze. She didn't know what to say. Her cheeks flushed, not from pride, but from shame. The word bought still stung, even after everything. Baraka sighed, leaned against the doorframe, and said firmly, "I bought her freedom." Nothing more. There was no performance in those words, no attempt to play hero. Just the plain truth, raw like dry earth before rain. He didn't owe anyone an explanation, but for the first time, he chose to give one, not for the people, for her. Azima gave a slight nod, and in that silent gesture, something aligned. It wasn't affection yet, it was respect, solid ground. In the days that followed, the gossip continued, and, as usual, it morphed. They said Baraka gave the girl new clothes, that he let her sleep in late, that he wasn't the type of man to raise anyone, so that situation must have another name. But there was something curious. No one ever said it to his face. One afternoon, Mama Jalia, the same one who started spreading those venomous lines, tried to bring it up at the market, while Baraka was picking out okra seeds, taking good care of the girl. Baraka? They say she's already running the place. Baraka raised his eyes, stared at the woman for 2 long, heavy seconds, and said simply, "I take care of what's mine, and of other people's freedom to." Mama Jalia dropped her gaze, and never brought it up in front of him again. In the village, silence could speak louder than any answer, and slowly, the jokes withered like plants without water, because there was no scandal, no secret, just a girl who now walked with her head held high, and a man who wasn't ashamed to protect what the world tried to cast aside. And that kind of courage, even in silence, had always been stronger than the spiteful laughter of the neighbors. The weather in Kiwanya was unpredictable. The sun would scorch for weeks, and then, suddenly, a cold front would sweep across the mountains, bringing with it the damp wind that made the roof tiles sing at night. It was during one of these sudden changes that Azima began to cough. At first, a soft irritation, muffled into the back of her hand. Then came the fever, uninvited, relentless, breaking her body into pieces that couldn't be seen, only felt. The next morning, she didn't get up. The floor of her room, always clean, bore the footprints of forgetfulness. The water in the pitcher hadn't been touched. The half-open window let the cold wind dance over her sweaty skin. Baraka noticed her absence. It wasn't the silence of chores that caught his attention, but the silence of movement. He called out once, no answer. Called again, nothing. He pushed the door open with his fingertips, like someone afraid of what they might find. Azima was curled up in bed, face flushed, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. Her hand hung off the edge of the mattress, trembling, like a fragile branch in a storm. She said nothing. Neither did he. Baraka went back to the kitchen, grabbed a clean cloth and a bucket of fresh water. He dampened the cloth and began to cool the fever the way he'd seen his grandmother do when he was a child, swapping cloths, placing them on her forehead, then her neck, offering spoonfuls of thin porridge. No skill, no training, just will. That first night, he slept sitting at the edge of her bed. eyes wide open, alert to the slightest movement. When Azima mumbled in fevered delirium, he whispered, "You're staying. No need to run." It was like talking to the air, but each word carried a quiet faith. The second night, she woke with a start, tried to sit up, but fell back onto the pillow, her eyes wide, confused, unsure of where she was. Baraka held her hand firmly, but gently. "Easy, you're safe. No one's going to touch you here." It was the first time he said "here" with that tone, a "here" that meant shelter, promise, solid ground. Azima, even if she didn't fully understand, closed her eyes and slept. The night was long, and her body burned like embers. Baraka alternated between whispered prayers and old songs his mother used to hum when fever threatened his childhood. He no longer knew if it was faith or desperation, but he didn't want to lose her. Not this girl. Not now. On the third night, the wind calmed. Her fever slowly broke, like rain easing into cracked earth. Azima woke in the morning, vision still blurry, but clear enough to see the man asleep beside her, head resting on his arm, forehead leaning on the edge of her bed. She didn't speak, she just watched. It was the first time she had ever seen someone watching over her. That morning, Baraka rose with a sore body, but peaceful eyes. He made a bitter tea with muanza leaves, as he had learned from the older women, brought it to her room. She tried to refuse, but he said firmly, "Drink. It's awful, but it heals." She obeyed, coughed as she swallowed. He smiled a crooked, restrained, nearly invisible smile, but it was a smile. In the days that followed, Azima began to recover, still weak, but color had returned to her face, light had returned to her eyes, gratitude filled her chest. Baraka said nothing about it, kept tending to the farm as if everything was the same, but something had changed. Now, when he left bread on the table, he also left a wildflower beside it, small, yellow, purposefully picked. Azima began watching the rhythm of the day with more curiosity. She no longer woke just to obey. Now, there was fresh coffee on the stove, clean cloths on the line, and someone who knew her name, not to yell it, but to call it with respect. The illness had taken down the last wall between them, not with words, but with presence, because some pains bring people closer than declarations ever could, and some healings begin when someone chooses to stay, even when the other has no strength left to ask. It was a clear day, but the sky looked tired. The clouds drifted slowly, as if carrying old stories. Azima was better now. She walked with more confidence, her eyes no longer darting away from every face, and her body, though still light, held itself with more strength. The illness had passed, but left behind invisible marks, the kind only time could erase. Baraka, on the other hand, remained the same in almost every way, quiet, steady, but watchful. Every little thing she did caught his eye, the way she folded the sheets, how she blew on her porridge before sipping, the way she stared at wildflowers with eyes full of memories. He knew, inside her, was a whole world of untold stories. It was on a Saturday, while returning from the nearby town with sacks of flour and seeds, that Baraka saw something hanging in a stall at the market. A blue dress, simple, but beautiful. The fabric was light, scattered with small white flowers, and it reminded him of the quiet afternoons on the porch. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't flashy, it was just beautiful, and he thought of her. He bought it without explaining it to himself. Maybe it was gratitude, maybe affection, maybe an attempt to return something that life had stolen without asking. When he got home, he left the dress folded on her bed. He didn't knock, didn't say a word, just left it there. Azima found the bundle in the late afternoon. She unwrapped it carefully, fingertips gentle, like she was afraid it was a mistake. When she saw the blue fabric, she froze. Her heart clenched, not from joy, but something else, a mix of surprise and fear. She picked up the dress, lifted it, held it against the light. It was too beautiful, for someone like her. Impossible. She folded it quickly, tucked it deep in the drawer, and said nothing about it. Not that day, not the next. But Baraka noticed. He didn't say anything. Still, that night, while tending the wood stove, he spoke without looking at her. "If you don't want to wear it, that's fine, but I want you to know, you deserve nice things." Azima was startled by the sentence. Her face flushed. She stayed, silent, not out of pride, out of shame, out of not knowing how to react to words so rare, so strange. I'm not worthy of that," she murmured. Baraka stopped stirring. wiped his hands on a cloth and replied calmly, "You are worthy of respect and of choice." He said no more, and neither did she. That night, Azima lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His words echoed like an old drumbeat. "You are worthy of choice." It hurt, but it also healed. The following week, on a cloudy Sunday, she washed the dress. With her own hands, ash soap, and the care of someone handling something sacred. She hung it on the line with reverence, watched it from a distance, as if still unsure it really belonged to her. A few days later, she wore it. No announcement, no special occasion. She was just cleaning the house, but decided to wear it. Baraka saw her walking across the porch. He said nothing, just watched. She in the blue dress, barefoot, looked like a new version of herself, still carrying the past on her shoulders, but now with a new kind of light in her eyes. Later, while putting away jars in the cupboard, she said, almost as if speaking to herself, "My mother liked dresses like this, blue ones, with little flowers." Baraka heard her, but didn't reply. He felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't sadness. It was the weight of realizing that, slowly, she was returning to herself. That night, Azima stepped out into the yard. She looked up at the stars, feet still bare on the cold earth. The blue dress swayed in the breeze, and for the first time, she felt she didn't have to hide from what was beautiful, not because of the dress itself, but because someone, one day, told her she had the right to choose to wear it. Time moved slowly, like the waters of the Kazadi River in the dry season. Days on the farm followed the same rhythm, morning light slipping through the cracks in the window, the smell of coffee mixed with burning wood, the sound of cattle grazing in the distance, and the steady beat of Baraka's hoe in the field. Everything seemed unchanged, but inside Azima, something new was beginning to form. A different kind of silence, no longer made of fear, but of space. Space for what had never been given time to grow. Azima woke before the rooster crowed. Her body still bore traces of recent illness, but her eyes held a quiet shine. She ran her fingers through the leaves, fed the chickens, scrubbed the cloths with strength. The house was always clean, not out of duty, but out of care. A kind of tenderness one only has for something that, little by little, starts to feel like home. Baraka watched from a distance, not with the eyes of an owner, but with the quiet awe of someone who sees beauty blooming where he never thought it could. One morning, the sky was thick with low clouds. It was planting day. Baraka left early, carrying the plow to prepare the land. Alone, Azima decided to clean the back of the house, a place she rarely visited, cluttered with old logs and the remains of the old chicken coop, where tall weeds had taken over the path. While clearing dried leaves and shifting branches, she spotted a flower, simple, yellow, small, but there it was, standing tall amidst the weeds and neglect, blooming without asking permission to exist. Azima stopped. She stared at it for a long while. Then she sat down on the ground, arms wrapped around her knees, and said, more to the wind than to anyone, "My mother liked these." Her voice came out light, but full. It was the first time she'd spoken of her mother since leaving her stepmother's house. The words carried the scent of childhood, the weight of grief, the memory of a love that never returned. She smiled, not a wide smile, but a true one, the kind that surfaces when the soul finds, even for just a moment, a good memory buried beneath the rubble of pain. Baraka returned later, hoe over his shoulder, clothes covered in dirt. He saw Azima in the backyard, kneeling by the flower bed, the small flower in her hands. He didn't speak, but he stopped and waited. She looked up and saw him watching. She thought of hiding the flower, but didn't. She just stayed there, still, holding the delicate stem like someone holding the last thread connecting them to the past. It was her favorite flower, she said, unprompted. She used to say flowers like these only grow where the earth still has a heart. Baraka didn't respond right away. He walked over, crouched beside her, and pulled a small pocket knife from his trousers. Carefully, he dug a tiny hole in the ground. Then, "Let's plant it again," he said. Azima handed him the flower. Together, they placed it in the soil, covered it with earth, and watered it with water she brought from the kitchen. They remained in silence afterward, staring at the small yellow dot against the dark soil. It wasn't just a flower. It was a bridge, a gesture, an invisible thread between two worlds, the one that had been lost and the one still waiting to be born. From that day on, Azima began to hum while washing the dishes. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. but Baraka heard it, and never interrupted, because her singing was proof that something in her was coming back, or perhaps arriving for the first time at the market. She walked with more confidence. The women didn't whisper as much anymore, and even when they did, Azima no longer shrank. There was a quiet dignity in her, the kind that doesn't need to be explained. In the yard. At night, she would sit with a cloth over her shoulders, gazing at the sky. Sometimes she talked to herself. Other times, she simply listened to the wind, and Baraka, who had never learned how to speak of feelings, began to understand that love might be exactly that, staying near, quiet, but present, like the small flower that grows in the middle of the weeds, not because it was invited, but because it found the courage to bloom. Life has its ironies, the kind even time can't explain. Sometimes, the same road someone walks away on becomes the one they return by, but with tired steps, pride stripped away, and eyes quietly asking for a chance that may no longer be there. That's how it was with Bullied. After years gone, after abandoning his daughter without a letter or a trace, he came back, not as a strong man, not as the charming husband he once pretended to be. He returned hunched, with a dry cough in his chest, sunburned skin, and a lost stare. On his back, a cloth bundle. In his arms, a baby boy, the child of the new woman in his life. Or maybe, now, the only one left to him. He arrived at the market like someone who had no place to go. Swollen feet, torn shirt, the baby crying from hunger. The village women exchanged looks. Some recognized him, others spat on the ground in disgust, but no one offered him shelter. Anyone who knows the story of an abandonment doesn't rush to offer shade to the deserter. Baraka was at the market that day, trading potatoes for seeds. When he saw Bullied from afar, he recognized him instantly. The man who once traded a daughter for his own whim, the one who left a girl alone in the hands of a bitter woman. Baraka watched from a distance. He didn't go near. Later Bullied appeared at the entrance to the farm. Baraka was fixing the fence when he heard a weak whistle from the gate. He looked up and saw a man who seemed smaller than the memory had left him. He said nothing, just stared. Bullied, the baby now asleep, in his arms, shuffled closer. They told me that Azima's here, he said with a hoarse voice. I'm not asking for much, just shelter, a corner to rest for a few days. Baraka crossed his arms, took his time to respond. She's here, yes, but she's not a voiceless girl anymore. She's a woman, and she has a home, and she has a name. Silence fell. Heavy. Azima appeared in the doorway. She was wearing the blue dress, now a bit worn from use, but still dignified. Her eyes didn't tremble. She didn't run, didn't shout, just looked. It was Bullied who recognized her last. First, his eyes tried to remember. Then, his mouth opened without sound. Finally, the tears fell. Azima, my God. She said nothing, didn't take a step. She stood there, whole, steady, and what he saw was something he had never seen before. Dignity, not inherited, earned. Forgive me, daughter. I was wrong. The words came torn, cut between coughs and regret. She stepped forward, looked at the baby in his arms, a tired child, innocent, then looked at Baraka, who hadn't moved. The boy needs food, she said. At last, she went inside, prepared a plate, set it on the table with a clean cloth. She didn't offer a hug, but she didn't turn her face away. Bullied sat down, ate slowly, like someone tasting shame along with the food. When he finished, he tried to say something, but she was already gone. There was no fight, no shouting, only silent justice, the kind that doesn't come from revenge, but from restored worth. That night, Bullied slept on the porch, the child in his arms, the cold creeping in. Baraka brought him a blanket, not for him, for the child. By morning Bullied was gone, left no note, asked for nothing. Maybe he understood there was no room left for someone who only returns when they need something, or maybe he knew that what he broke couldn't be fixed with late visits. Azima didn't cry, didn't mention it. She just washed the dishes, swept the porch, and carried on. And Baraka understood. The deepest pain isn't the one that screams, it's the one that keeps going after the scream has stopped. But in the strength of that woman who had once been left behind, there was something greater than pain. There was power. Life is slow, but certain. It doesn't rush to give answers, but it never fails to deliver what is due. And it was with time, the same time Nafila once believed would protect her, that everything came back. Not as loud revenge, but as a silence heavier than any scream. After Balos's departure, the house where Nafula once ruled became a ruin. The money dried up, vanity withered. The neighbors who used to laugh with her vanished. Her fine clothes were replaced by worn-out rags. The voice that once thundered through the yard became a whisper. The hands that only knew how to strike now trembled just to hold a spoon. It was late in a dusty afternoon, when the sky burned red, that Nafula reappeared, but not like before, not with stiff steps and her nose in the air. She came barefoot, thin, her face sunken, hair unkempt, her stomach growling from hunger, and shame walking beside her like a loyal shadow. She stopped in front of Baraka's house, didn't knock, just stood there, motionless, waiting to be seen. Azima saw her. She stepped outside slowly, apron still dusty with flour. When their eyes met, the entire past rose between them like a wall. Azima didn't flinch, but she didn't run either. "I need food," Nafila said, eyes downcast. "I have nothing, nothing." The words fell like a blade with no handle. There was no pride left in her voice, only emptiness, the kind she had dug herself, blow by blow. Each time she chose cruelty over care. Azima took a deep breath. She didn't respond, just turned her back and went inside. In the kitchen, the stove was still warm. There was rice, beans, and a bit of roasted fish. She served a simple plate, but generous, covered it with a clean cloth, placed it on a wooden tray, and returned to the door. She handed the plate to the woman who had once called her a curse, who made her sleep on the floor, who beat her for any small mistake. Nafula took the tray with thin, dirty fingers, tried to speak, but the words failed. "You can sit over there," Azima said, pointing to the bench under the mango tree. The stepmother obeyed. She ate in silence. Every spoonful came laced with humiliation and disbelief, because never, even in her worst nightmares, had she imagined being fed by the one she had treated as less than human. Baraka watched from afar, from the cattle pen. He didn't interfere. He knew that moment belonged to her. To Azima, it was the cycle closing itself, without noise, without revenge. When she finished eating, Nafula set the plate aside, sat there for a while, staring at the ground. Then she stood slowly. Azima was already heading back inside but heard her whisper, I don't know why you don't hate me." Azima paused, looked over her shoulder and said, "Because whoever carries hate has no space left to plant peace." And she went in. Nafula walked away slowly, her feet stirring up dust. No one knows where she went. All that's certain is that she left that day with a little less hunger and far more regret. That night, Azima sat in the yard with the same quiet calm as always. Baraka brought 2 cups of hibiscus tea. They sat side by side, in silence. He said, "Today, you had more courage than most people have in a lifetime." She didn't answer, but she looked at him with a different kind of light in her eyes. Because that day, Azima wasn't just fair, she was free. And freedom for someone who was once treated like a possession is worth more than any payback life could offer. At Baraka's farm, everything moved at the rhythm of the sky. When it rained, they planted in haste. When the sun scorched, they waited with patience. And that year, the drought was harsh. The cracked earth looked like a body worn out by too many broken promises. Leaves drooped, animals mooed louder, and even the birds' song sounded sadder. The people in the village murmured that this wouldn't be a fruitful year, that they'd need to tighten their belts, share the little they had, and pray a lot. But Baraka didn't murmur, and Azima didn't fear. She swept the house like someone clearing her own fate, folded the cloths like someone arranging pieces of the past. She planted flowers in the garden and poured hope into the rice pot. While the sky stayed silent, she filled the ground with faith. The cornfields held on. The leaves dried at the tips, but didn't fall. The beans, still shy, pushed through the dust. Baraka walked between the furrows with a hand on his chin, eyes watchful. He knew nature was like people. When tended to with consistency, it gives back in its own time. It was on a heavy, humid night that the sound began. First light, then steady. The first drops tapped the roof like ancestral drums, and soon the rain poured down in earnest, the kind that soaks you to the soul. Azima ran to shut the windows, but before she did, she stood still, watching. The water washing the yard, the leaves dancing, the earth swallowing each drop like it was quenching a thirst long held. Baraka stepped out to the porch. He stood there, arms crossed, no coat, no rush. The rain soaked him, but he didn't move. He felt, and beside him, Azima, both of them silent. Only the sound of water breaking the night's stillness. The following week, the crops responded. The green returned with strength, as if it had only paused to gather energy. The corn rose tall. The beans spread along the vines. Even the cassava plants blossomed. The harvest was abundant. Baskets overflowed. Chickens sang louder. The cattle, fattened. The kitchen smelled like abundance. Neighbors came to see and said, "You got lucky." The rain came just in time, but Baraka knew it wasn't luck. It was peace. The peace Azima sowed in her everyday gestures. Because ever since she stepped into that house, everything had moved to a new rhythm. The stove burned more steadily. The animals slept more soundly. Even the wind seemed to pass by with more respect. She was the one who cared for the home like someone praying with their hands. And he was the one learning, day by day, that the presence of someone can be the greatest blessing. One late afternoon, while they were gathering corn from the field, Azima suddenly stopped, her hands covered in soil, her face damp with sweat. She looked at Baraka, who was carrying a heavy basket, and asked, "Do you still want to buy me?" The question came like a soft lightning strike. There was no anger, no fear, just honesty, like someone finally able to look back without getting lost. Like someone who understands the past only casts shadows when we don't light the right lamp. Baraka stopped, set down the basket, straightened his back and met her gaze. He took his time to answer. Not out of doubt, out of respect for the weight of the question. "No, now I want to share life. But only if you want to." Azima said nothing, but she smiled. A smile full of grounding, of time, of certainty. Because there, in that field full of corn and the smell of wet soil, she understood. No one could buy her any more. She was her own. And for the first time, free to choose to stay. There was no music, no audience, no jewels. But there was a calm afternoon, bread fresh out of the oven, firewood burning slowly, and two people who had learned to walk side by side without stumbling over each other. The sky was clear, with clouds, scattered like tired cotton, and the farmyard smelled of freshly washed clothes. It was an ordinary day. But for Baraka, days with Azima had long since stopped being just routine. They had become life. He watched the way she moved, how she tended the pots of beans, how she watered the garden with cupped hands, how she patiently waited for the porridge to thicken just right. That woman who had arrived silent, wounded, sold like a burden, now walked with dignity. She didn't walk behind, nor ahead, she walked beside. Baraka, who had lived alone for years, had begun to feel that maybe solitude wasn't the absence of people, but the absence of someone who understands your silence. It was after a morning of hard work, in the field that he made up his mind. Not because he was impulsive, but because he knew that some choices shouldn't be delayed. At the risk of losing something rare, Azima was sitting on the porch, sewing a tablecloth. The blue dress was no longer new, but it was hers. And now, she wore it without fear, without doubt. Baraka arrived with feet dusty from the field, hat in hand. He stopped in front of her, and, for a moment, said nothing. Azima looked up. She sensed something different in that silence. "The corn's ready?" she asked, to lighten the air. Baraka gave a small smile. "It is, but I didn't come to talk about corn." She set the cloth on her lap. She waited. He didn't kneel. He wasn't a man for theatrics. But his eyes, steady and gentle, said everything, and his voice came slowly, bearing the weight of what is real. "Azima, I know the world never gave you a choice. That they took you, left you, silenced you. But not here. Here, everything you have is yours, including the right to say yes, or no. She took a deep breath. Her heart beat slow, but strong. "I want to share life. Share the house, the bread, the good days and the hard ones. Not because you owe me anything, but because, if we're to go on, I want it to be by your side. Only if you want that to. Azima looked him in the eyes, and in them she saw the same resolve from the day he dismounted the horse and pulled her. From that beating, the same gentleness with which he had cared for her when she was sick, the same truth in his words when he told her, freedom cannot be bought, only respected. She rose slowly, walked to him, and with a smile that asked for no permission, she replied, for the first time, "I want to." There was no applause, but the wind blew strong. The mango tree swayed like it was dancing. and time, that old witness to all things, seemed to pause for a second to record the moment. Azima wasn't bought, or given, or handed over. She chose, and that choice, planted in a soil that once held only pain, became the firm root of a new story, made of respect, of sharing, and of a love that doesn't shout, but stays. There were no silk dresses, no glittering jewels, no photographer, no guest list of the important and well-dressed, but there was fresh bread on the table. There was the scent of rosemary spread across the yard. There were eyes that met without fear, without debt, without pretense. And above all else, there was respect. It was on a warm late afternoon, beneath the shade of the old mango tree, that Baraka and Azima came together before the eyes of the village, not out of obligation, but by choice. She wore a simple outfit, clean cotton. He wore his usual shirt, carefully washed, both barefoot, as if to honor the ground beneath their feet. The neighbors who once whispered, now simply watched in silence. There was no mocking, no disdain, because love, when true, commands respect, even from the hardest of hearts. The ceremony was brief. The blessing came from the wrinkled hands of old Mama Nia, midwife and keeper of the village's proverbs. She raised her hand and said, "May what began in pain bloom in peace. May the mistreated seed become a tree with wide shade." And so it was, with words rooted deep and gestures full of meaning. No empty promises, just the certainty of two people who chose to walk together, not to complete each other, but to share the path. Nafula, the stepmother, didn't come. She had left the village weeks earlier, carrying her silence with her. She wasn't invited, but neither was she cursed. Azima didn't need revenge. She needed peace, and that she already had. Her father Belozi still wandered the village's edges, thinner, quieter. Some said he lived with a distant relative, others whispered he slept beneath the market shed. He never knocked on Azima's door again, and she never had to lock it again, because forgiveness isn't forced reconciliation, it's freedom of the soul. At the farm, life moved on. The corn grew strong, the beans ripened at their own pace, and the house breathed lightness. Azima now sat on the porch with a book in her lap and a cloth wrapped in her hair. Baraka, at times, just sat nearby in silence, listening to the sounds of the kitchen, the chickens, of life itself. And it was there, on that very same porch, where everything had begun with silence, that one day she said, "I thought I'd be a servant for the rest of my life. Today, I'm a woman, owner of my name." Baraka replied, only with a look, because some words don't need to be said. They're planted in daily acts, in small gestures, in peace built like a house, raised slowly, but with one's own hands. Azima, the girl once sold out of spite, became a woman by choice, and was loved without ever needing to be quiet. And fate, that old storyteller, looked upon them and smiled, because sometimes justice doesn't come with a sword. It comes with warm bread, respected silence, and a love built slowly, but never undone. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our community.